On a spring afternoon in 1962, John Kennedy delivered the commencement address at Rice University. He used the occasion to make an outlandish promise.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win on the other two.
A man on the moon by the end of the decade. That was only 7.5 years away. In 1962, the United States was running a distant second to the Soviet Union in the space race. NASA had finally managed to put a man in Earth orbit. But to think that this newly formed civilian agency that combined military space initiatives under civilian control could hit a moving target 250,000 miles from Earth with a living human being seemed preposterous. It was preposterous.
And yet, they did it. The story of how it was done has been told often. The story of what made it possible is not as well understood. It's hard to look at NASA today and remember that it's the same organization that was putting men on the moon 30 years ago.
Today, the shuttle fleet is grounded after the second catastrophic loss of a crew in the program. And investigators are placing much of the blame on NASA itself. There were failures in the lunar mission days too, of course.
Apollo 1 burned on the pad and killed 3 astronauts before a single mission had been flown, because no one understood what would happen when complex electronics operated in an atmosphere of pure oxygen. Apollo 13 nearly ended catastrophically for the same reason.
But there's a big difference between the Apollo failures and the shuttle failures. On Apollo 1 and 13, technology failed. On Challenger and Columbia, people failed. Apollo 1 and 13 were examples of bleeding-edge technology. Challenger and Columbia were examples of well-understood technology. Investigators looking into the causes of the Apollo disasters recommended technological improvements. Investigators looking into the causes of the shuttle disasters recommended organizational improvements inside NASA and its contractors.
One of those contractors, Thiokol Corporation, still manufactures the solid rocket boosters for the shuttle. It was an O-ring seal between the solid fuel cells in one of Challenger's boosters that failed and led to the explosion of its liquid fuel tank.
It was a late January morning like this one when they tried to launch the Challenger from that pad there behind me. But that morning the temperature was 26 degrees. The solid rocket boosters weren't designed to operate in temperatures below 53 degrees. So Thiokol engineers refused to certify the boosters to fly. But the launch had already been postponed twice, and NASA didn't want to do it again.
The first teacher in space, Christa McAuliffe, is on board. Ronald Reagan wants to talk about her during the State of the Union address that night. NASA officials want to prove that the space shuttle can deliver on its promise of safe, routine spaceflight.
A lot of people know the truth about the risks that morning. Only a few Thiokol engineers choose to speak it. But NASA managers demand that they offer conclusive proof that the O-rings will fail. The Thiokol engineers don't have that kind of data. So their managers overrule them, and the launch proceeds.
58 seconds later, 7 astronauts are dead. They die because too many people chose not to seek, speak, or act on the truth. They die because too many people were passive, subservient, and more concerned with looking good than doing good.
Okay, all operators, watch your data carefully.
Flight final until we get stuff back. He's on his cue card for abort mode.
Thiokol redesigned the O-rings after Challenger, but Thiokol knew that it wasn't O-rings that failed, it was people that failed. So they redesigned their corporate culture as well, to make every employee personally accountable for the safety of the crews that flew Thiokol rocket boosters. In other words, they made every employee personally accountable for seeking and speaking the truth. NASA reorganized in response to the disaster as well. They put more quality checks in place. But over time, money, politics, bureaucracy, and human nature eroded much of what NASA did in response to the tragedy.
In January 2003, NASA engineers know that when foam insulation from the shuttle's liquid fuel tank breaks off and hits the orbiter during launch, as it frequently does, there is a risk of damaging the heat-insulating tiles on the orbiter wing. But it hasn't caused serious trouble before. The problem could be fixed, but that would cost money and time. Two commodities NASA never seems to have enough of. And fixing it might hold up completion of the space station. So data about the risk is filed away. While Columbia is still in space, NASA engineers analyzing launch video discovered that a piece of insulation about the size of a suitcase has hit the wing. But it's not clear how much damage the impact has caused. The debris assessment team in Houston contacts mid-level Air Force officials through a back channel and asks them to use their high-powered airborne cameras to photograph the wing. On day 7 of the mission, Air Force personnel are ready to take the pictures when they receive an email message from the NASA liaison office assuring them that the shuttle is in, quote, excellent shape, unquote. The message goes on to explain that the foam strike is not considered a major problem. Apparently, the debris assessment team's back channel to the Air Force has been discovered by senior NASA officials, who terminate their request because official procedures have not been followed. Later, an investigator will say, because the problem wasn't identified in a traditional way, Houston refused to identify the problem. But why didn't the debris assessment team follow protocol in the first place? Because they were afraid the request would take so long to work its way through multiple layers of management that there wouldn't be enough time left to analyze the pictures and develop a workable plan before re-entry.
During re-entry, as Columbia hits the outer layers of the Earth's atmosphere over California, superheated gases burn through the damaged section of the wing, destroying it from the inside out. The wing disintegrates and the shuttle is destroyed.
7 more astronauts die.
Investigators determined that if the astronauts had known about the damage, they could have attempted a repair of the tiles with a spacewalk. Or they could have used the space station as a lifeboat while a rescue mission was prepared. Risky? Very. But it could have worked. We'll never know. It makes you wonder how we ever got to the moon in the first place, or how we'll ever get to Mars.
Organizations fail when people aren't willing to seek or speak the truth. When looking good is more important than doing good. When doing the right thing isn't anybody's job. That's what happened at WorldCom and Enron. Two extremely successful companies that failed with terrifying swiftness. In the aftermath, people wondered what happened. Things seemed to be going so well. Investigators looking into these disasters have uncovered all sorts of evidence that a lot of people knew things were going wrong, but rather than speak up, they remained silent. They didn't want to risk their jobs. Ironically, by not taking a risk, they risked everything and lost it.
When organizations fail, fingers get pointed. And they usually get pointed out. It was competition, it was the market, it was politics, it was bad management, it was a lack of funding. There's no shortage of adversity in the world. But organizations that succeed face adversity too. Success or failure is something that we do to ourselves. Organizations don't fail because they face adversity. They fail because of the choices people make. For example, you could choose to just show up every day and do your job and maintain the status quo, keep your head down and wait for something to happen. And it probably will. But it may not be something you like.